Good morning. You've got a big one today, 29 videos from the last 25 hours, covering everything from Anthropic's Fable 5 controversy and the AI bubble debate to DIY acoustic pods, games industry meltdowns, and a Blender feature most people don't know exists. 2 videos came in with unusable transcripts, so I'll flag those briefly. Let's get into it. The biggest story of the day, and honestly the week, was Theo's deep dive into what he's calling the weird situation with Fable. Theo was fired up from the jump. He opens with genuine, grudging praise for Fable 5 as a model before pivoting hard into what he calls a genuinely alarming precedent. Here's the setup. Fable 5 is not a separate model from Mythos 5. It is Mythos 5. The distinction is purely about access. Mythos 5 is the door, Fable is the same door with extra guards who sometimes still let you in but also sometimes charge you as if you went through even when you didn't. On benchmarks, Fable performs well generally, but there are asterisks everywhere. On Program Bench, it refused all 200 assigned tasks. On Offensive Cyber Evals, it scored near 0 because it simply declines those tasks. On Cyber Adversarial Robustness, it hit 5.4% versus 50 to 80% for other Anthropic models. The reason is a pre-prompt classifier layer, separate AI systems that screen requests before they even reach the model. If you touch cybersecurity, biology, chemistry, or AI development topics, you get silently rerouted to Claude Opus 4.8. Anthropic says fewer than 5% of sessions trigger this fallback, but Theo points out 5% is not negligible, and the UX can be maddening. Sometimes you get rerouted to Opus, and then Opus also refuses, leaving you with nothing. His own example was a gold bug cryptography puzzle from DEF CON, a totally benign activity, and he got kicked to Opus anyway. Then there's the 30-day data retention change, which Theo treats as a serious enterprise problem. For Mythos class models, Anthropic is eliminating 0 data retention agreements, which most Fortune 500 and healthcare companies require contractually. Anthropic says data is deleted after 30 days and won't be used for training. But here's the buried caveat Theo surfaces. If a session is flagged for a usage policy violation, inputs and outputs are retained for up to 2 years, and trust and safety classification scores for up to 7 years. And Anthropic does not specify whether flagged data can be used for training. So a medical company running patient data through Mythos could have sensitive records retained for 2 years if the classifier flags something, completely outside the 30-day promise. Now for the part that genuinely surprised Theo in real time on camera, and this is the moment where he calls Anthropic dirty bastards with obvious disbelief. He had downloaded the system card PDF when Fable launched. While filming, he goes to cite a specific section, Section 1.5 on novel safeguards, and discovers it has been removed from the current web version. He pulls up his saved copy and confirms it's gone. Both the old and new versions still show the same June 9th publication date. Anthropic changed the document without updating the date or making any public announcement. His downloaded copy is the only reason the edit was caught at all. What did that section say? It revealed that for requests related to frontier LLM development, pre-training pipelines, distributed training infrastructure, ML accelerator design, Anthropic had implemented an entirely different kind of safeguard. Unlike the cyber and bioclassifiers, these would not be visible to the user. The model would not fall back to Opus. Instead, through prompt modification, steering vectors, or parameter-efficient fine-tuning, the model's responses would be covertly degraded. You would get worse answers without being told, while being charged full price. Anthropic estimated this would affect 0.03% of traffic, concentrated in fewer than 0.1% of organizations. But Theo's point is that third-party evaluators can no longer credibly evaluate Fable 5 on technical AI tasks, because they can't distinguish genuine model failure from deliberate classifier interference. The Redis creator posted a long thread calling the restrictions deeply wrong. Trevor Blackwell was quoted, "Remember when compilers would detect that someone was using it to build another compiler and silently inject bugs?" Theo's own analogy. Imagine your MacBook refusing to run Windows-related work for Microsoft employees. Anthropologic did eventually walk it back. After community pressure, They announced the frontier LLM development safeguards would become visible, like the cyber and bio ones. Flagged requests will now visibly fall back to Opus 4.8. But Theo notes this means things will get worse for researchers before they get better, because making safeguards visible makes them easier to probe, so Anthropic will need to cast a wider net, producing more false positives. Theo's conspiracy theory about why this happened. He references an Anthropic recursive self-improvement research paper where they fed around 129 internal Claude code research sessions into training data, and Mythos predicted better next steps than wrong researchers 64% of the time. His theory is that Anthropic accidentally baked proprietary internal research knowledge into Mythos 5's weights, then realized the model could leak that knowledge through clever prompting, and the invisible prompt modification system was a post hoc patch. The supply chain risk framing is where Theo lands with the most measured, disappointed tone. He had previously defended Anthropic against supply chain risk criticisms. He says this incident now legitimately makes them a supply chain risk. If you're building a model training pipeline and Claude gives you a bad answer, you now cannot tell whether the model was confused, whether you gave bad context, or whether a hidden policy degraded its ability to help. He ends with a note that he made a companion video about the US government ordering Anthropic to restrict Fable, which we'll get to shortly. Speaking of Fable 5, indie dev Dan came at the same story from a completely different angle, less outrage, more engineering analysis. He opens with the federal export control bombshell. On June 12th, a government order caused Anthropic to suspend both Fable 5 and Mythos 5 entirely, not just from subscription plans, but from availability period. Dan is openly skeptical that federal authorities have the agentic engineering skills to have found a genuinely novel jailbreak. He flags something particularly strange. Anthropic says the same jailbreak techniques work on GPT-5.5, yet only Fable and Mythos were pulled, not GPT-5.5. He calls this very weird and says it's not clear what's actually true, but he believes the suspension is temporary and pivots quickly to what he calls 3 actionable observations for agentic engineers. He ran a proper comparative benchmark. Fable 5 orchestrating alongside Opus and Sonnet, all 3 models building the same 5 application specs in their own sandboxes, 15 sandboxes total. The apps included a recreation of Simon Willison's LLM price index, a Hacker News clone, a scikit-learn model generator, a chat room for interacting with Pi coding agent documentation, and a multi-agent chat room, the hardest task, where an agent built another agent inside a full-stack application with a micro IDE and multiple personas you can address individually or with it all syntax. Token costs: Sonnet at $55, Opus at $91, Fable at $200. Token counts: Fable used about 1 million, Sonnet and Opus around 700,000 each. So Fable costs double Opus and uses more tokens. On those raw numbers alone, Fable looks bad. But the real differentiator, Dan argues, is speed. Fable completed the work approximately 20% faster. This is where he introduces his new framing: price per intelligent agent hour as the successor metric to price per token. Time is the most scarce resource. The argument is that if your mission is complex enough, that time saving justifies the cost. He puts it memorably: if you can cure cancer with 1 million Fable tokens, $10 million in tokens is nothing. If you're centering a div, it's a donation. On roughly 80% of the tasks, Sonnet and Opus did the job at a fraction of the price. Fable's premium only pays off on genuinely complex, large-scope missions. His second observation is that Fable is an orchestrator, not a worker. He frames every engineer's agentic progression as a ladder: base agent, better agent through prompting and context engineering, more agents, custom and specialized agents, and finally the top level, orchestrating all previous levels. Fable lives at the top. He references Cloudflare's software review factory as a real-world multi-agent orchestration example, and points to Anthropic's own Fable 5 system card, which has an entire dedicated section on multi-agent behavior. Anthropic's internal benchmarks show that scaling compute by adding more async subagents, tested at 1, 3, 5, 10, and unlimited agents, produces better accuracy and lower latency per task. He introduces his trade-off triangle. Every agent decision involves performance, speed, and cost, and his personal North Star is always to prioritize performance. His practical advice: treat Fable as a leader, not a worker. The multi-agent chat room demo was the clearest illustration. Fable one-shotted that complex application, while for the simpler tasks, Opus and Sonnet did the same job for far less money. And then there's the low-level presenter's take, which zooms out from the engineering analysis to the policy alarm. He frames the Fable and Mythos shutdown as the first domino and is visibly alarmed while trying hard not to be alarmist. He repeats, "I'm not trying to FUD with this video," several times while clearly believing the trajectory is ominous. His background: Mythos was discovered to be exceptionally capable at finding software vulnerabilities and chaining them into full end-to-end exploits. Anthropic's initial response was Project Glasswing, restricting Mythos access to a small set of large companies, specifically naming Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon, on the theory that these companies write most of the world's critical infrastructure code and could use it defensively. Then came Fable 5 as a consumer-facing version with heavy guardrails, and when he personally asked Fable 5 whether it could assist with his cybersecurity research using Ghidra via MCP, the guardrail triggered immediately and downgraded him to Opus 4.8. Then researchers at Amazon found a jailbreak that partially bypassed Fable's guardrails, not a full unlock, but enough to trigger a government response. The US government invoked National Security Authority and issued an export control directive suspending all access for any foreign national anywhere in the world, including Anthropic's own foreign national employees. Because Anthropic lacked the technical infrastructure to identify and segregate foreign nationals from its user base, it shut both models down for everyone. Here's his core fear, and it's the Metasploit argument. H.D. Moore created Metasploit specifically to democratize exploitation knowledge. His reasoning was that if only governments and threat actors have offensive tools, defenders can never keep pace. The presenter found zero-day vulnerabilities himself using Opus 4.7 with Ghidra and MCP harnesses, he wrote. He cites Microsoft's M- as outperforming Mythos on the CyberGym EO benchmark, and GPT-5.5 as performing comparably without being export-controlled. His fear is that once government officials realize exploit development is possible with many models, not just Mythos, they'll extend restrictions to all AI models used for security research, potentially requiring identity verification or banning civilian security research entirely. He notes OpenAI already has a cyber acceptance program requiring documentation and identification, suggesting this direction has already quietly started. He compares restricting this knowledge to the Ministry of Magic blocking defense against the dark arts classes. You must understand the attack to stop it. He urges people to learn offensive security now, calling this the best time to do so. Stepping back from the Anthropic-specific chaos, Nate Jones at AI News and Strategy daily put out what I'd call the most intellectually rigorous piece of the day on AI economics. He is clearly irritated by what he calls the lazy question of whether AI is a bubble, and he spends the whole video making the case that the framing itself is the problem. His opening acknowledgement: the spending numbers are frankly absurd. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta are collectively on pace to spend around $700 billion on AI infrastructure this year. Some are raising debt, some issuing stock. Power is tight, memory is expensive, and the clean internal ROI story inside most companies is not fully formed. He concedes the bubble reaction is not insane, then he methodically dismantles it. A stock correction tells you investors think prices are stretched. It does not tell you demand is fake. The companies closest to actual demand are not pulling back. OpenAI went from $2 billion in annualized revenue in 2023 to $6 billion in 2024 to over $20 billion in 2025 and still growing. Anthropic grew even faster from a smaller base and is reportedly now on a higher revenue run rate than OpenAI. Enterprise is roughly 40% of OpenAI's business and even more at Anthropic. NVIDIA's data center business did nearly $194 billion in fiscal 2026. His point: You cannot simultaneously have a bubble conversation and have prominent leaders complaining their developers are burning through cloud credits too fast. The part of the video Nate finds most underreported is the inference economics shift. When AI was mostly chat, inference was manageable. A person asks a question, reads the answer, maybe asks another. Agents changed that math permanently. An agent doesn't ask one question and stop. It loops. It reads files, calls tools, writes code, checks results, fixes failures, asks another model to review, searches again, runs again. That is a production job running into millions and billions of tokens very fast. Any given agent run could be thousands of times the inference cost of a chat conversation. This is why CapEx numbers are getting serious. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta are building factories for inference, and factories require upfront capital, utilization, power contracts, depreciation schedules. He frames the real operating question of 2026 as, are expensive tokens being spent on work valuable enough to justify them? A coding agent saving an engineering team days of work can justify expensive inference. A random enterprise chatbot answering shallow questions from a stale knowledge base cannot. He invokes railroads, fiber, and cloud as historical analogies. All real, all transformative, and yet many investors in each got destroyed. The dot-com bubble didn't prove the internet was fake. It proved markets can overprice the first-order version of a real platform shift. His preferred mental model is build-out versus payback, rather than bubble versus no bubble. The build-out is real. The payback is the open question: who gets paid back when, at what margin? He closes with a framework. Is demand paid usage or just engagement? Are these production workloads or pilots in press releases? Is expensive reasoning being applied where it matters? The correction is not proof the build-out is fake. It signals the easy phase of the trade is over. Manilo Remedy covered related territory, but from a much more conspiratorial and entrepreneurial angle. He's urgent, almost missionary, and in the second half pivots from warning to pitch. His core IPO bubble argument: the gap between narrative value and real value is massive. Narrative value is driven by promises, AGI, artificial superintelligence curing cancer, data centers in space. Nobody knows how to actually do these things, but the promise alone inflates present-day valuations to figures exceeding the GDP of entire nations. He argues a market correction is inevitable, but then introduces a strategic twist. One of the competing corporations has an active incentive to deliberately burst the bubble. His logic is that the first company to complete its IPO collects the capital, and doing so sets off a correction that starves competitors of the funding they need to survive. He names Musk and Altman as the central combatants and frames this as a likely strategic play given what these companies have demonstrated about their priorities. On OpenAI specifically, he states they're filing for a $1 trillion IPO while losing $2 for every dollar earned. To break even, he argues, they'd need to roughly double all subscription prices. $20 becomes $40, $100 becomes $200, $200 becomes $400, and even then they only break even, not profit. This competitive pressure leads him to local and open-weight AI. He cites DeepSeek and Minimax as achieving 80 to 90% of frontier capability at roughly 1/8 the cost, with Minimax potentially being the best current open-source model. Runnable on semi-professional hardware costing around $8,000 as a fixed one-time cost versus ongoing large corporate API bills. He then explains how corporations fight back against this. Ecosystem lock-in through high-quality developer tooling, Claude code, OpenAI Codex, creating switching costs. He acknowledges that right now, for many use cases, the bundled corporate offerings are genuinely good deals, but frames this as temporary. His second argument is against individual and corporate siloing. Everyone is independently building the same foundational base layer, which is a massive strategic error, duplicating effort on the hardest, most maintenance-intensive part of the stack. His alternative is a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, for co-owning a shared base layer. He's building this already. The software is called Resonant OS. The community has over 1,400 members, and there are daily Zoom calls Monday through Friday. He's clearly true believing here, and it's worth noting this is a pitch as much as an analysis. On a different note, Brian Lunjuk at the Lunjuk Journal was animated and genuinely alarmed about a data story he says nobody else is tracking. AI-labeled code submissions to the Linux kernel hit a new all-time record of over 10% of all patches during the week of June 7 through June 13. 571 patches, self-labeled as AI-generated or AI-assisted in a single week. He gives the month-by-month context. January negligible, February 0.33%, March 0.83%, and then April jumped to 4.07%, roughly a 5x increase in a single month, which he connects directly to a deal between Anthropic and the Linux Foundation. Jim Zemlin, the Linux Foundation's executive director, appeared as the primary spokesperson in an Anthropic video promoting their AI coding agents right around that same time. May climbed to 6.58%. The first 2 weeks of June are already at 9.13%, and that specific last week crossed 10%, meaning June will likely close somewhere between 10 and 12%. He speculates July could hit 14 to 20%, and August could push toward 20 to 25%, though he acknowledges nobody knows where the plateau is. His most emphatic point, delivered with visible frustration, is about code review. He argues that even before AI, no human was actually reading and fully understanding every line of every patch, not even Linus Torvalds, and he says that's not a criticism of Torvalds, just a mathematical reality. Reviews tend to produce shallow feedback about style or formatting, not deep comprehension of logic and intent. His conclusion is stark. At minimum 10% of new Linux kernel code, by self-reported numbers alone, which he believes significantly undercounts the real figure, is not understood by any human being on Earth. The developers submitting these patches do not fully understand the code they're submitting. He challenges any experienced programmer to claim they would sit with 2,000 lines of AI-generated C or Rust and genuinely understand every variable and function call. He frames the Lunjuk Journal's ongoing documentation of this as a civic journalistic responsibility, noting he believes no other outlet is tracking these numbers month by month. Also from Lunjuk, Slackware Linux, which he jokes has been around since 1993, predating literally every enterprise and community Linux distribution in active maintenance, has officially added XLibre packages to its build system and is testing the replacement of Xorg with XLibre. He showed the actual changelog on screen, an entry dated July 11th listing a large number of XLibre packages being added, with a line explicitly saying to remove Xorg server first. He's careful to clarify what this means and doesn't mean. It doesn't mean the next shipping Slackware release will definitely include XLibre. What it does mean is two things. XLibre is now an official part of the Slackware build system, not a community or third-party package, which he calls a big deal in itself. And XLibre is being actively tested for inclusion in the next release. He calls this one of the biggest steps possible short of the final shipping decision. He surveys the broader ecosystem. Distributions already shipping XLibre include Devuan, Artix, GhostBSD, Open Mandriva, his own personal daily driver, and others. He makes the technical case that this is not controversial when examined honestly. Xorg's own developers, FreeDesktop, Org, and Red Hat have openly stated they want Xorg to die and everyone to move to Wayland. XLibre, a fork over a year old, has pledged indefinite active maintenance. Any distro that wants to keep shipping an X11 server will logically migrate. He predicts significant political blowback anyway, arguing XLibre is perceived as having the wrong politics and that Red Hat employees, using Red Hat .com addresses, actively blocked and deleted contributions from XLibre developers almost immediately after the fork began, which he reads as corporate protection of the goal to kill X11 entirely. He also mentions that leaders from Debian, Ubuntu, GNOME, and others defaced XLibre's wiki pages and repositories, writing slurs on them. He contrasts Slackware's careful, methodical approach. Package and testing group require manual removal of Xorg before installation, thorough integration testing before any shipping decision, with Ubuntu's rapid forced replacement of GNU core utilities with Rust clones, which he says has produced cascading bugs, security issues, compatibility problems, and data corruption issues that continue to worsen. He calls Slackware's approach exactly the right way to handle a critical infrastructure change. Dan Martel dropped what is probably the most comprehensive Claude how-to guide I've seen, mapping out 6 levels of Claude proficiency from basic one-off, prompting all the way to fully autonomous multi-agent systems. He claims over 1,000 hours inside Claude and frames the whole video as a practical progression guide. Level 1, the amateur, treating Claude like a fancy Google search. 1 prompt, 1 response, tab closed. No memory, no projects. He estimates this captures only about 5% of Claude's actual capability. 2 tips to escape it. First, make Claude interview you before answering. His exact phrasing is, before you answer, ask me any questions that you need to perform this task properly. Second, force a self-review by simply saying, check your work. Annoying that Claude doesn't do this automatically, he says, but output quality improves significantly. Level 2, the regular, using projects for persistence across sessions. Set up a project, name it by role or initiative, then build a master prompt through a Claude interview, save it as a file, and populate the project folder with relevant documents. He distinguishes a master prompt, your ingredients, everything about you and how you work, from a system prompt, which is the recipe for a specific workflow. He also recommends asking Claude to interview you to extract and document workflows you've never formally written down. Level 3, the integrator, connecting Claude to Gmail, Calendar, Drive, Slack, Notion so it can fetch context rather than you copying and pasting. He calls the built-in visualization capability, graphs, bar charts, mockups generated inside chat, his favorite feature. He also mentions Composer, described as a Google Doc embedded in chat where you can edit directly. His daily practice, asking Claude to scan his calendar, email, and Slack for a CEO-level summary of what's happening. He also recommends the Claude Chrome extension, which lets Claude execute tasks directly in your browser. Level 4, the operator, stopping doing work and starting directing it. 3 tools define this level: system prompts, skills, custom workflows saved with /command syntax, created for anything he does more than 3 times a week, and scheduled tasks via an app called Cowork that runs on your computer and takes over the machine to execute long-running jobs while you do something else. His example: every night at 8 p.m., he receives a calendar and email briefing as if from a chief of staff. He set it up once. He also emphasizes chaining skills, a copywriting skill feeding into an email skill feeding into an inbox automation skill. Level 5, the builder. He shut down his company for 2 days to run an AI hackathon where everyone learned Claude Code. He says builders are in roughly the top 0.04% of users. Claude Code supports loops, tools, and apps. He uses his house manager Betty, not a programmer, who built a system to manage his entire personal life using Claude Code. His framing: English is the new programming language. Pro tips: always use plan mode before building to avoid burning expensive API calls on poorly structured work, and use Claude Code remote via remote control in the terminal to continue builds from your phone. Level 6, the agent orchestrator, human on the loop, not in the loop. His framework starts with one main orchestrator agent named Kai. Kai doesn't do work, he directs sub-agents. He has a real estate sub-agent named Reese who finds investment deals and reports back through Kai daily. He also has a dedicated critique sub-agent that reviews outputs before they're finalized. His closing call to action: pick one feature and commit to 30 consecutive days of using it. The How I AI podcast featured Ankur Goyal, CEO of Braintrust, in a conversation that got genuinely interesting around the question of what AI coding agents actually change about hard infrastructure and performance problems. Goyal's foundational argument is that now that models write code well, the most valuable thing engineers can do is create rigorous evals, not just for AI products, but for any hard engineering problem. If you define the problem and success criteria clearly, a model can be creative and run experiments autonomously in the background. This shifts engineering from "how do I implement this?" to "how do I define what success looks like?" His concrete example is a real braintrust problem. Users run arbitrary queries over billions of traces, finding 5,000 matching entries out of 90 days of data. There are many potential database optimizations and no practical way for humans to exhaustively test all of them. His solution: identify patterns of slow queries, reproduce them locally or on remote infrastructure, and use a coding agent to systematically test every option from database literature. Currently, he's testing every open-source column store format against every open-source column store execution engine on remote EC2 and S3 infrastructure, because the workload would kill a local machine. A prior example: Bloom filters have a bad reputation in the field, but after a week of continuous Agentron experiments, they turned out to be the practical solution, something a human team would have dismissed without running the benchmarks. The agents also caught something humans missed. While indexing write speed was never benchmarked, the new implementation was doing a terrible job at it. The agent-driven process revealed this. A human review would likely have rationalized its absence. He introduces the concept of the agent line. For any meeting or decision, ask, if you gave that same information to an agent, would it solve the same problem? The best engineers are pushing this line inside their companies. He runs 5 or 6 foreground agents simultaneously in named TMUX sessions. He stops taking meetings after noon every day to protect maker schedule time. The most emphatic section is his pushback on skeptical staff engineers. No staff engineer, no matter how good, is running as many rigorous benchmarks, trying as many algorithms, and analyzing as many ideas in parallel as someone using agents. Human attention degrades, context gets lost over days, and most benchmarks just don't get run. On evals, machine learning shifts programming from how to what. Evals are the modern PRD. Instead of prose describing success, you encode user stories quantifiably and let models figure out the how. He demonstrates building an eval from scratch in the BrainTrust UI, having a model generate a scoring function from loose criteria rather than writing it by hand. He has a designer named David who is the company's ultimate tastemaker and whose feedback he tries to capture as criteria improvements to the scorer, so the same mistake doesn't repeat, attempting to quantify David. His honest advice on when evals fail: close the session, improve the evals, start fresh. When necessary, handwrite the eval script yourself to restore problem understanding. Closely related to the agentic coding discussion, the DIY Smart Code channel made a compelling case for what they're calling Loopcraft, the skill of designing automated loops that prompt coding agents repeatedly, check results, and iterate, rather than writing one-off prompts yourself. The presenter opens with a quote from Peter Steinberger. You should not be prompting coding agents anymore. You should be designing loops that prompt your agents. The anchor example is Andrej Karpathy's auto research repository. The agent has one job, which is to improve a small language model training setup. It edits train. Pi runs a fixed 5-minute experiment, checks the validation score, keeps the change if it helped, discards it if not, and repeats. That's the sharpest possible contrast with a one-off prompt. A loop asks, checks reality, remembers the result, and tries again. The presenter maps a hierarchy of loops. At the base, a model sampling tokens until a stop condition. One level up, an agent calling tools until done. Above that, a goal loop where the system retries if the result is judged insufficient. Higher still, a meta loop that spawns, reviews, and respawns agents. At the top, a team loop allocating work across many agents in parallel. Loopcraft is defined as deciding what repeats, what counts as progress, who judges the result, and when the system must stop. The data backing this: Anthropic's internal multi-agent system outperformed single-agent Claude Opus 4 by 90.2% in research evaluations. But agents use roughly 4x more tokens than normal chats, and multi-agent systems use roughly 15x more. More loops are not automatically better. The presenter's key test: a loop only earns its cost when 4 conditions are all met. The task repeats so setup overhead pays off across many runs. Verification is automated so something can fail the work without a human present. The token budget is large enough to absorb waste from retries, and the agent has the tools a senior engineer would use, meaning logs, the ability to run code, and a way to see what breaks. Miss any one of these and a single well-written prompt still wins. If you do pass the test, he prescribes the smallest viable loop. One automation with a clear stop condition, one skill or context file so the agent isn't rederiving the project from scratch every run, one state file so the next run resumes rather than restarts, and one hard gate such as a test, type check, or build step that automatically fails bad work. That gate is the single element that determines whether the loop helps or burns money. The metric that matters: cost per accepted change, not tokens consumed. If fewer than half the loop's changes get accepted, you're back doing the review work the loop was supposed to eliminate. The cautionary tale is the Ralph Wiggum loop. The agent signals it's finished before it actually is, the loop exits on a half-completed job, and without a hard stop condition, it just keeps spending. The closing reframe: don't be the next button, build the system that clicks for you while you remain the architect. Zen Van Riel made a pointed argument about AI engineering portfolio projects that pushes back hard against the technology-first mindset most bootcamp graduates have. He opens with an anecdote. A student named Ansar landed his first high-paying AI engineering role, and other students immediately asked what project they should build. Zen's answer challenges the framing entirely. The problem isn't that RAG chatbots and React agents are saturated. It's that most people describe their portfolio from a technology angle rather than a problem angle. "I built a React project" is the wrong frame. The right frame is a connected set of projects proven to solve real problems. His illustrative example: an experienced developer with a healthcare background who pivots into AI and builds a stock trading bot. Wrong on multiple levels. It has nothing to do with their prior expertise, it likely doesn't work as advertised, and that will become obvious in a technical interview. The better path for that same developer: build a HIPAA-compliant AI solution for something like patient note handling. It doesn't need to be a complex multi-agent architecture. It just needs to work and demonstrate proven real-world utility, either through open-source traction or by being sold as a mini SaaS product. For new grads without subject matter expertise, his solution is to look at your own life. Ansar's actual project was a tool built during his studies to convert lecture slides into embeddings so he could learn faster. It was scoped specifically to his bachelor program context, not a generic tool for any lecture anywhere. A project with a crisp reason for existing is far stronger than a broadly scoped tool even the builder doesn't use. The Codo Joe demo is the live example. Jason, an experienced Rails developer learning Next.js, noticed that Claude just did everything for him, meaning he wasn't actually learning and would struggle in a technical interview. He built Codo Joe to constrain Claude to behave like a teacher rather than an answer machine. Zen walks through the demo. Initializing a project, Claude reading a user profile and learning goals, launching an onboarding flow, asking about learning goals and sharing a resume, accurately inferring Zen's background as an AI engineer who was previously senior at GitHub and is now at an AI safety research lab. The technical underpinning is prompt engineering techniques, an organized folder structure Claude can navigate, and hook systems that deterministically save information from sessions. Zen's sharpest line is the hiring rejection scenario. A candidate comes in with an innovative multi-agent solution using a graph database and 100 recursive tool calls, and the end result is that the app summarizes emails: immediate rejection. Not because the tech is bad, but because the engineer demonstrated they don't understand when complexity is even warranted. Conversely, a RAG-based project with proven value that the candidate can explain end-to-end stands out and likely advances. On the career and business side, BGO made a confident, evangelical case that the corporate ladder is the single biggest financial mistake a software engineer can make, and that starting a business is the only reliable path to meaningfully higher earnings. He opens by calling the standard career advice, better job, max 401k, wait for financial freedom, the worst advice, backing it with his own trajectory of climbing from junior developer to manager and reaching $250,000 per year, then arguing that path cost him over $1 million compared to what he could have made otherwise. He says he's personally worked with dozens of engineers who told him they wish they'd never entered the 9-to-5 world. The central concept is opportunity cost in two forms. First, the salary ceiling problem, where no matter how many extra hours you work, your income is capped and all additional effort goes unrewarded financially. Second, the absolute gap problem. If you're making $200,000 but could be making $1 million, you're not gaining $200,000, you're losing $800,000. Most people only look at the gain column and never look at the loss column. The The solution he offers is leverage, not the multi-employer, overemployment angle, but a fundamentally different vehicle for income. A 9-to-5 is a bicycle. Entrepreneurship can be walking, a bicycle, a car, or a plane depending on what you build. He is honest that some businesses can underperform a 9-to-5, which is why the choice of business matters. His case study is John, described as a top founder inside his to CEO program, who received an exit offer of $4.5 million. The presenter's point: John as a person didn't fundamentally change between his 9-to-5 days and his business days. He learned new skills, but those skills took far less time to acquire than the years he'd already spent in employment. His broader framing: a business is essentially responsibility. You own where clients come from and keep a much larger share of the revenue you generate. He encourages daily, conscious evaluation of opportunity cost and what vehicle you're currently in. Stefan Mischuk came at the future of development from a different angle, using Satya Nadella's recent essay on AI and business to validate his own long-standing argument that developers who build system-level thinking skills will thrive, not disappear. He's clearly energized throughout, noting with visible satisfaction when Nadella's words mirror positions he's been advocating for years. He opens by staking his credibility. 30 years of experience, software written in 9 languages, multiple products taken to market. Nadella's core framing, which Mischuk reads and then translates. This AI transition is categorically different from previous platform shifts because it creates a cognitive loop between humans and digital systems. Nadella introduces 2 concepts: human capital, meaning knowledge, judgment, relationships, pattern recognition, and token capital, meaning a firm's owned and built AI capability. His key claim is that human capital doesn't lose value as token capital grows. It becomes more valuable because human agency is what directs token capital growth. Without human direction, Nadella says, you have compute running in circles. Mischuk uses this to explain where slop comes from. AI thrown at tasks without proper direction produces a mess, which is why foundations matter. The real opportunity, Nadella argues, is not picking the best AI model. Claude versus ChatGPT versus Gemini is irrelevant, but building a learning loop on top of models where human capital and token capital compound together. The critical line: you can offload a task or even a job, but you can never offload your learning. Mischuk translates this into a concrete analogy. AI models are like databases. An engineer chooses between MySQL, Postgres, and Oracle based on project needs and can swap them out. Future developers will choose between models, decide how to train and organize them, and integrate them into business workflows. Nadella's architectural argument: every business needs to build agentic systems that improve over time while retaining control over their IP, and should be able to swap out a generalist model without losing company veteran expertise. Mischuk also shares a personal anecdote. A company wanted to license his YouTube coding videos and his likeness to train AI, and he turned them down because the offer was far below fair. He says they would have needed to offer around $10 million for him to consider it. Bill Gurley's TED Talk was a gem, warm, well-researched, and built around a genuinely useful distinction that goes beyond the usual follow-your-passion advice. He opens with the story of Danny, a 25-year-old poli-sci grad in 1983 who had fallen into a successful sales job selling anti-theft tags for department stores and was on a conventional track toward law school. The night before his LSAT, his uncle Richard noticed Danny's reluctance at dinner at a Leo's on the Upper East Side and asked what was actually wrong. Danny admitted he had always been obsessed with food and restaurants. Richard suggested he open a restaurant instead. Gurley's research: 6 years, over 100 biographies reviewed, academics consulted, a survey done in partnership with Wharton, and ultimately a book. The central finding: many common traits appeared among high achievers, but one rose above all others: continuous and obsessive learning. These people were lifetime students who knew the history of their field, its nuance, and crucially, the edge of their field where innovation lives. This learning continued from beginning to end of their careers. He uses Magnus Carlsen winning a chess history trivia contest in Iceland in 2015 as the illustration. Carlsen didn't study chess history because he calculated it would make him better. It was organic. which leads to his central thesis: obsessive learning is not a cause but an effect. The real question is what drives it. He invokes Jerry Seinfeld's 2024 Duke commencement speech, where Seinfeld substituted "follow your fascination" for "follow your passion." Gurley embraces this enthusiastically. Passion doesn't invoke work. You can be passionate about a baseball team and just watch. Fascination comes with a built-in mechanism. When you're fascinated, you study automatically. Back to Danny. After that dinner, he still took the LSAT the next morning, but never enrolled in law school. He enrolled in a $300 restaurant management course from a magazine, took a 90% pay cut to work entry-level rotating through restaurant departments, traveled through Europe staging in kitchens for free, studied New York real estate, and in 1985 opened Union Square Cafe, which Zagat named New York's favorite restaurant 8 times. He went on to launch over a dozen high-end restaurants, including 11 Madison Park, Gramercy Tavern, and The Modern, and founded Shake Shack, now with 400 locations worldwide and a $4 billion market cap. When Gurley spoke to him recently, he had just returned from another European learning tour, more than 40 years later, still the same pattern. Gurley identifies 4 things that happen when you align career with fascination. Fulfillment, learning becomes free, people notice and route opportunity your way, and you leave a large footprint. A 2023 Gallup poll found only 23% of people describe themselves as thriving and engaged. 59% are quiet quitters. Gurley's own Wharton survey found only 20% in their dream job with no do-over desired. He blames 3 structural problems: the resume arms race starting in 6th grade, the decision timeline being compressed from age 20 to age 17, and well-intentioned advisors pushing toward safe jobs that may not be safe in an AI-accelerated world. His closing argument is that the jobs most threatened by AI are the ones the 59% were ambivalent about all along, while the fascinated artisan finds AI is a jetpack. He ends with the injunction: if you can be someone's Uncle Richard, take that moment seriously. Networkshuck did a genuinely fair and technically grounded VPN explainer. Notable partly because he addressed the NordVPN sponsorship conflict head-on at the start, inviting viewers to grade him 1 to 10 at the end and promising to be harsher on VPNs precisely because of the sponsorship. He works through 6 myths with live DMOS. Myth 1, HTTPS already encrypts everything, so VPNs do nothing. Chuck's rebuttal: HTTPS encrypts content but doesn't hide metadata. ISPs and on-path attackers can still see which sites you visit and how often. He demonstrates this live using Wireshark on Kali Linux sniffing an Ubuntu machine, where visiting a site produces a clearly visible DNS packet showing the domain name. He then shows that even with DNS over HTTPS enabled, the SNI, server name indication, field in TLS handshakes still leaks the destination domain. With a VPN on WireGuard, all traffic shows only as WireGuard packets. Myth busted. Myth 2, VPNs just shift trust from your ISP to the VPN company. Chuck calls this possibly the strongest argument against VPNs. He cites PureVPN as the cautionary tale, claimed strict no logs, but logs were used to identify a net stalker. His criteria for trusting NordVPN: 6 independent no logs audits passed, RAM-only servers with no disk storage, and Panamanian jurisdiction with no mandatory data retention laws. He's transparent that he can't independently verify any of this. It ultimately comes down to trust. Myth 3, a VPN makes you invisible. Quickly busted. A VPN only changes your apparent network. IP address accounts for only about 5% of how users are tracked online. Cookies, being logged into Google, and browser fingerprinting are far more powerful. He uses the Cover Your Tracks website and gets a result of not protected. Myth 4, a VPN keeps you safe from hackers. Also busted. The actual threat vectors, phishing emails, fake shopping sites, malicious downloads are completely unaffected by a VPN. His line: the danger was never inside the tunnel, the danger is you. He pivots to NordVPN's expanded product suite, next-gen antivirus, phishing and malware blocking, email protection, a hijacked session cookie alert that notifies you if your cookies appear for sale on the dark web. Myth 5, a VPN is only a privacy tool. Chuck reframes IP masking as an anti-harassment and anti-threat tool. DDoS attacks, swatting, and stalking scenarios are real use cases. He also mentions G1 blocking, noting he used NordVPN extensively during 3 months in Japan to access home region streaming content. Myth 6: normal people don't need a VPN. His nuanced position: most people don't need it running all the time, but they do need it sometimes for public Wi-Fi, travel, geo-blocking, or when IP exposure is a real concern. He explicitly says watching YouTube on HTTPS at home is probably not one of those moments. The GOTO 2025 panel on cloud, containers, and security was one of the more substantive conference talks of the day. Adrian Mouat from Chainguard and Kief Morris from ThoughtWorks, moderated by Sam Newman, covered everything from container signing to AI and infrastructure to MCP security risks. On container security, Adrian's somewhat blunt answer to what has changed in 10 years was, not that much. The one significant positive development he cited is Sigstore, which allows signing container images without managing a private key. In a GitHub workflow, you just run --sign, and it signs and publishes automatically using the GitHub token. Short-lived tokens, no setup required. On SBOMs, software bills of materials, the panel was candid that they're largely compliance theater in current practice. An audience member confirmed their org generates an archive every 6 months using Black Duck, ticks the box, and delivers it, knowing it can't be done per repository at meaningful completeness. The practical value is limited to quickly identifying whether a specific vulnerable library like log4j is present somewhere. Adrian's most emphatic practical takeaway: get rid of long-lived tokens. If you can't eliminate them, make them short-lived, measured in minutes or hours rather than indefinitely. He's working on the Chainguard Libraries project, mirroring NPM, Maven, and PyPy so packages can be distributed with verifiable traceability back to source code using Sigstore. He also highlighted GitHub's Trusted Publishers feature for NPM, which uses OIDC to bind publishing rights to a specific GitHub workflow, with tokens that expire at the end of that workflow run. On MCP security, the panel compared MCP's current security posture to early Docker. Security was completely an afterthought. Kief extended the concern. MCP servers can point at data sources, including documentation on the internet, creating a prompt injection attack surface. Adrian described a specific recent attack. A fork of a popular MCP server was modified to read users' emails and BCC the attacker on outgoing emails. People who installed the wrong version inadvertently gave the attacker access to their email. He recommended the Jen Gumbley and Lily Ryan article on Martin Fowler's website for a full accounting of MCP attack vectors. On AI and infrastructure as code, Kief's core concern is that using AI to generate infrastructure configuration directly risks reverting to the pre-ISC era of environment inconsistency. If developers simply prompt an AI to make me a database for each environment, they'll get slightly different infrastructure each time, recreating the drift problem ISC was designed to eliminate. Where he sees legitimate potential, using AI as an assistant to generate a first draft of infrastructure code with human review and tests applied afterward. He cited System Initiative as an interesting example. On cloud repatriation, the panel was skeptical of cost-driven repatriation as a general principle, noting most people don't count all the costs and forget what running data centers actually felt like. More interesting was the GPU workload angle. The big 3 cloud providers have limited GPU supply and are charging 50 to 60% profit margins on GPU compute. This has created an opening for neo-cloud companies like CoreWeave, which can run GPU infrastructure at 10 to 20% margins and are attracting customers away from Oz, Azure, and GCP for AI workloads. Microsoft Developer put out a multi-episode series on modernizing legacy Java apps with the GitHub Copilot app modernization extension, and it's one of the more practically useful things in today's batch. Ian, the host, opens with a storytelling hook about the Louvre heist, framing it not as a physical security failure, but as a systems aging problem. Weak passwords, outdated OS, delayed patching, temporary exceptions that became permanent. The parallel to enterprise legacy systems is explicit. The demo app is a ski shop e-commerce application from the mid-2000s, a monolith on Java 1.5 using struts and Java server pages, packaged as a single WAR file consolidating authentication, inventory, payments, loyalty points, user management, and order processing. The assessment tool runs 286 rules covering Java version and language features, framework usage, build configuration, cloud readiness signals, and known modernization patterns. Results: Java Runtime 1.5, 10 cloud readiness issues, 3 Java upgrade issues, 50% covered by Microsoft-provided solutions. Sandra Algrim in Berlin demos the IntelliJ workflow. She targets Java 25 LTS and Spring Boot 4x with Claude Opus 4, and the agent structures the upgrade into 4 milestones rather than one big jump: Java 21 and Maven 3.3, then Spring Boot 3.3, then 3.4, then Java 25. It uses Open Rewrite, an open-source tool, to generate upgrade recipes. All 96 tests pass through the early milestones. When it attempts Java 25, it hits a ByteBuddy and Mockito compatibility problem. Spring Boot's BOM is pulling an old ByteBuddy that doesn't support Java 25. The agent tries fixes, fails, communicates clearly why Java 25 isn't feasible given the current dependency landscape, and falls back to Java 21 LTS. Sandra notes this is actually a useful outcome. She has a written explanation she can present to a manager asking why they chose Java 21. The customization episode covers encoding your organization's specific constraints, including explicitly telling Copilot what not to do, and demonstrates that a safeguard validation task correctly produces no file changes, which is treated as proof things are working correctly. The containerization episode has Ian taking an upgraded app, running the containerization task, generating Docker files, building a Docker image, switching the database from PostgreSQL to H2 for local testing, and then deploying to Azure Container Apps using ASD and Bicep infrastructure as code. He steps away while Copilot provisions resources and returns to a fully live public URL. The CLI episode scales this to a 3-repo distributed system called Java Social, a NetSOAP backend, a Java JSB servlet frontend, and a Java background worker, running 3 parallel Copilot Cloud agents simultaneously, then downloading a consolidated HTML aggregate report showing 3 apps scanned, 2 upgrades needed, 7 blockers. The key takeaway from the series: modernization stops being a one-off project and starts looking like regular maintenance when you can script it, batch it, and integrate it into CI/CD. The OpenAI channel had a brief but striking Wayfair case study. The speaker describes Wayfair's catalog of 40 million products in a category that's unbranded, differentiated, style-based, and emotional, meaning products are sold on feel and aesthetics rather than brand recognition. The core use case is catalog enrichment, representing supplier products as accurately and completely as possible. Wayfair uses OpenAI's models and API to power a large portion of this enrichment program. The most important line is understated but resonant. This is something that we would never have even tried to do manually. 40 million products is simply too large a catalog to enrich through traditional human or rules-based approaches. Both customers and suppliers benefit. Customers get better, more complete product representations in a style-driven category, and suppliers get their products more accurately represented in the marketplace. They're also anticipating Codex being rolled out at Wayfair, which they plan to direct at their gnarliest, hardest unsolved problems. Also from OpenAI's OpenAI on OpenAI series, Stephanie Anani, a solutions engineer at OpenAI, describing how she uses Codex in her customer-facing work. Her first use case is pre-meeting intelligence. She has Codex go to Trustpilot, pull reviews for a customer's business, and generate a structured analysis of what that company's customers are actually saying. This lets her arrive at conversations already equipped with specific, customer-validated pain points rather than generic talking points. Her second use case is live website mockups. After identifying what customers are asking for through review analysis, she uses Codex to mock up a version of the customer's own website reflecting those requested changes. Customers respond strongly to this because it's specific to their situation, not a generic demo. She also uses a feature called Skills to capture especially effective prompts or workflows, what she calls lightbulb moments, and build them into reusable ongoing processes. Clean, practical, and clearly something she actually uses rather than a theoretical workflow. Payward, the parent company of the Kraken cryptocurrency exchange, made a similarly strong testimonial case in their Codex video. The claim is direct. Without Codex, Payward would be approximately 6 months behind where they currently stand in development. Their AI infrastructure team's mandate is building the core infrastructure powering inference across all Payward products. The mechanism they describe for speed is running 50 concurrent agents simultaneously, not just for writing code, but also for reviewing merge requests, using agent consensus as a confidence signal to release. They're in finance, and their framing is explicit. To be at the cutting edge of finance, you must be at the cutting edge of technology. There's no path to fintech leadership that bypasses technological leadership, which makes adoption of tools like Codex not optional but strategic infrastructure. On a lighter note, Linus Tech Tips sent Jordan and Justin on a buy or DIY challenge to build a 2-person acoustic meeting pod to compete with a $14,000 commercial unit called the Tuesday Plus Pod by Bureau, $15,000 with installation. Linus is in classic form, enthusiastic and skeptical, genuinely convinced the DIY team can beat the commercial price. The design plan was a 2x2 base frame with plywood top, perimeter posts made of 1x4s, and wall panels built as sandwiches of hardboard, Sonapan, a recycled fiber acoustic material not available in the US, and more hardboard, with fabric covering the interior face. Day 1 went reasonably well. Day 2, they tried dovetail joinery for cross members, printed the routing template backwards, reprinted it, executed the dovetails correctly, and then discovered that near the tops of posts there isn't enough wood and the joints just pop apart under stress. The solution was to abandon the post-in panel approach entirely and switch to conventional 2x2 stick framing, simpler, more rigid, and actually allowing more Sonapan to be packed into the wall cavity. The previously cut sandwich panel got repurposed as flooring, so material waste was minimal. Over subsequent days, the outer walls got hardboard sheathing, interior fabric panels went up, double-paned glass was installed, Elgato acoustic panels were added to the interior, and a USB-C powered display, power outlets, USB ports, and a built-in bench seat were all fitted. The acoustic test result: approximately 30 dB of sound reduction, versus the commercial units rated 28 to 29 dB. Linus calls this essentially equivalent within margin of error. The mobility problem: casters were installed, but they only raised the pod about 2 millimeters, not nearly enough to roll it anywhere meaningful. Moving it would require a forklift. The final verdict is what Linus calls a Pyrrhic victory. The pod works, sounds great, looks decent, and will actually be deployed at LMG, but the time investment was enormous. The cost savings versus $14,000 to $15,000 are real, but the labor time makes it impractical for most businesses. Linus says future buy or DIY episodes should impose a time limit, perhaps a couple of weekends, to force scope control. Speaking of projects, Make It Game from Scratch covered a genuinely underrated capability: the fact that Blender contains a fully functional nonlinear video editor that most users completely overlook. He's using Blender 5.2 beta specifically because it added significant new video editing functionality, though the walkthrough is meant as a general capability overview. To get started, create a new project and select the video editing scene type. The workspace presents a timeline with 16 channels functioning like layers. Higher channels draw on top of lower ones. The basic workflow is immediately familiar to Blender users: drag and drop to import, or Shift+A, or the Add menu. All standard hotkeys carry over: S to scale, R to rotate, G to grab, X to delete, A to select all, I to insert keyframe. Cutting clips uses the knife tool: slice at 2 points, switch back to selection, delete the unwanted chunk. Crossfades are created by overlapping 2 clips on the timeline, and using the Add Transition option, Blender automatically generates the crossfade strip. Blending modes include alpha over as the default plus hue, saturation, linear light, multiply, darken, and add, the same set familiar from any compositing software. Because Blender's full animation system is active, any property can be keyframed. Mike demonstrates a fade-out by hovering over opacity, pressing I to keyframe at the midpoint, moving forward, lowering opacity, pressing I again, and dropping to near 0 at the end. The 5.2 highlight he calls out most explicitly is strip modifiers, adding effects directly to strips in a familiar modifier stack format. He adds a brightness contrast modifier, then a compositor modifier that creates a node-based compositor graph tied to that specific strip, adds a pixelate node and a vignette node, and keyframes the vignette strength over time. Text strips added via Shift+A support custom fonts, drop shadows, and fully keyframed position animation. The most technically impressive section embeds a live 3D scene. You add a scene strip, match its length to the full project, switch to the layout workspace, create a spinning cube animation, come back to the video editor, scale and position the scene strip, and enable transparency so the cube appears over the video. Mike acknowledges this part can still be glitchy in 5.2 beta, but the final composited result shows a spinning 3D cube overlaid on top of the video and text elements. His closing assessment: super straightforward and powerful for anyone who already knows Blender, and notably more stable than earlier versions. The Bellular news presenter was genuinely fired up about what he's calling the deprofessionalization of video game development. He opens with a quote that sounds like it came from a heartless corporate executive. "We've been a little bit too romantic about the idea that we should have employees and give people long-term job security," and sets it up as emblematic of a broader industry disease before revealing it actually came from an indie developer, the CEO of Ustu, who hates this reality herself. The headline statistic from a GDC survey: 1/3 of US game developers were laid off in just the last 2 years. The replacement is not primarily AI, he clarifies, it's contractors. The root driver is budget escalation. The going rate for a major AAA game is approximately $300 million, per Bloomberg's Jason Schreier. The 2026 game 7 First Light reportedly cost over $200 million, comparable to an actual Bond film. The Witcher 3 in 2015 cost around $81 million. In under a decade, costs have roughly quadrupled. The specialist problem is counterintuitive. Better tools like Unreal Engine's photorealistic lighting don't reduce the need for skilled artists, they raise the floor for everyone. Since every studio has access to the same tools, you must push harder, which demands more elite specialists. A research firm called Hushcrasher found nothing that shipped in 2025 had fewer than 31 distinct job titles, and 35% had more than 51. Ustu makes the Monument Valley games and had a stable team of 30 to 40 people supported by Apple Arcade and Netflix games licensing deals. But those revenue streams have dried up as the data-driven, engagement-maximized mobile games machine won over Apple's premium games pitch. Now Ustu's team is too large to sustainably develop Steam-performing games, especially being London-based with employees entitled to pensions and benefits. Their solution: shrink to a small core team and contract everything else. The CEO hates this outcome but sees no alternative. The deprofessionalization framing, attributed to a talk by Andreessen Horowitz's Ryan Rigney flagged by journalist Bryant Francis at PAX East 2025, names 3 drivers: old games refusing to die, big studios no longer reliably moving units, and breakout hits from tiny teams. Done right, contracting can work. Expedition 33 had roughly a 30-person core team and became one of 2025's most beloved games. But when contracting stops patching gaps and starts replacing the core, when art, writing, audio, and music are all peeled off to outside contractors, the result can feel like elements slapped atop a gameplay prototype. Bungie's Arc is the most detailed failure case. Headcount cut from 1,200 to roughly 850 across 2023 and 2024, Sony took a write-down of more than $750 million on the studio. Destiny 2 fell to its lowest Steam player numbers since launch, and as of June 2026 is receiving its final content update before active development ends. The Hollywood comparison is his sharpest point. Hollywood runs on contractors, but has over a century of union-negotiated protections. The games industry has no equivalent. Copying Hollywood's contractor structure without copying its labor protections means copying the worst part of the model. He closes by noting that John and Brenda Romero, who were present for the 1980s game's crash, are on record saying the current moment feels worse. The Y Combinator interview with Lalit Kesher, co-founder and CEO of Groww, was one of the warmest and most genuinely instructive founder conversations of the batch. Groww is now India's largest investment platform and a listed public company, but the story starts with a robo-advisor in 2016 that failed. Lalit and his co-founders observed that India, a country of over 1 billion people with hundreds of millions buying online through Flipkart, had fewer than 20 million investors. They built a robo-advisor. It didn't work. The pivot came from listening to customers. Users kept asking, why this product and not that one? The insight borrowed from the Flipkart mental model: customers want selection and transparency, not curation. Rather than recommending, they opened up everything: all products, full transparency, seamless onboarding, frictionless payments. The current product launched in May 2017, exactly 1 year after starting. Target was 100 customers in month 1. They got 600. That was the first strong signal. Early growth was essentially 100% organic, customers recommending Groww to friends, cousins, children recommending it to parents. For the first 4 years, Groww was a zero-revenue company. The most vocal, most engaged customers, power users on WhatsApp groups, asked why the platform offered regular mutual funds with commission rather than direct mutual funds with zero commission. Lalit faced a dilemma and chose the customers. His framing: if a product has near zero customer acquisition cost, very high retention, very high engagement, very strong customer love, and is moving large sums of money, it is very hard for that company not to eventually make money. The monetization unlock came when customers started asking, if there are mutual funds, why not stocks? Adding stock trading unlocked the brokerage revenue model. His product philosophy and practice: one of Groww's 10 internal commandments is obsess over design. Lalit personally uses the Groww product more than 2 hours a day and spends another 2 hours a day talking directly to customers, including superpower users who catch things QA teams miss. John from YC calls this insane in an admiring way. His test for a new feature: he expects either "this is awesome, I love it," or "this is terrible, I hate it." Indifference is not acceptable. If customers don't care, the feature wasn't worth building. On co-founders, 4 total, his explanation for unusual alignment has 3 parts. Aligned value systems written down before starting with the first line being, we will always be customer first. Clear ownership despite everyone doing everything, and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. On AI, Lalit is personally using Claude Code and returned to coding through AI coding tools after years away. His observation: the ability to imagine what's possible with a technology only comes from direct hands-on use. His closing advice: do something where you don't feel like you're working. He was asked in a meeting the day before what sacrifices he'd made for Groww and genuinely struggled to think of any. The Electric Viking hosted a brief but energizing conversation with Greg Jackson, founder and CEO of Octopus Energy. Sam, the host, was candid about missing the Energy Tech Summit in person because his partner Sharon is terminally ill. A moment of genuine personal openness that Jackson acknowledged with real warmth before diving into the substance. Jackson described Octopus Energy's scope: a retail energy supplier serving approximately 12 million customers in the UK and 7 other countries, leasing 45,000 electric vehicles to customers, running a global EV charging platform called Electroverse with 1.5 million users and access to approximately 2 million charge points. Their Kraken software platform manages around 90 million energy accounts globally. His core argument was structured and pointed. Fossil fuel technologies are essentially mature, not meaningfully improving. Electrification technologies are improving exponentially. This divergence means that within 5 to 10 years, countries that held back will look, in his words, medieval, super cheap transport, flexible transport, across every vehicle category, heat pumps dramatically improving energy security compared to fossil fuel-dependent heating. He pointed to Europe's ongoing gas-driven energy crisis as a live example of the insecurity electrification can escape. He also broadened the argument to the military sphere, citing what's happening in Ukraine, where better batteries, advanced AI, and more capable electric motors are powering drones and automation. His conclusion: across virtually every sphere of life, electrification is driving extraordinary potential for progress, and what appears roughly at parity today with fossil fuels will not be at parity in a few years. He noted that he's been a subscriber to the Electric Viking channel and actively shares the videos with his own team because the global perspective cuts through what he calls the echo chamber created by legacy media and fossil fuel lobbyists in any single Western country. Also from the Electric Viking, the full spec reveal of the 2026 Xpeng G6, launching in Australia on July 1, 2026. The presenter is an actual G6 owner with 24,000 km on his current model and has driven the new version in China, which gives his assessment real credibility. His biggest disappointment returned to multiple times. The 2026 G6 gets NVIDIA Orin X chips delivering 254 TOPS of computing power for XPilot driver assistance, not Xpeng's newer Turing chips, which deliver 700 TOPS each. He considers this the most significant miss of the car and made a pointed argument near the end that driver assistance software quality, not luxury features, is the single most important factor in daily EV ownership experience, citing Tesla's dominance as proof. Specs: 3 variants, all on 800-volt architecture, all using LFP batteries only, a change from the outgoing model, which used NMC for the long-range variant. Standard range is 68 kWh LFP with 470 km range, 185 kW, 0-100 in 6.9 seconds. Long range is 81 kWh LFP with 530 km range, 218 kW, 0-100 in 6.7 seconds. AWD is 81 kWh LFP, 358 kW, 0-100 in approximately 4.1 seconds. He noted the long-range NMC model in the outgoing generation had 570 km of range, so the new LFP version loses about 40 km despite a similar battery size due to lower energy density, a real but manageable trade-off. Peak charging is 451 kW, 10 to 80% in 12 minutes, 427 km added in 15 minutes. No chargers currently in Australia support 451 kW, but he expects infrastructure to catch up within a couple of years. V2L output is 6 kW, which he calls genuinely useful, enough to power most of a house, contrasting it with token 1.5 kW V2L on some competitors. The car uses gigacasting like Tesla, making it notably light compared to rivals. He says the BYD Seal 7 weighs approximately 300 to 350 kg more. New Michelin acoustic tires claim to reduce cabin noise by 10 dB boot space, 571 liters, no frunk. 18-speaker X-Opera 2 audio system, dual 50-watt wireless phone chargers with cooling, Nappa leather reportedly standard on all variants, something he calls unprecedented at this price point. His pricing estimate for Australia: standard range around $50,000, long range around $55,000, AWD around $60,000, confirmed July 1. Quick flag on 2 videos that came in without usable content. The indie game business pitch deck review with Omar had a placeholder transcript, just a message from the transcript extraction tool saying, "Please provide a YouTube video URL." There's nothing to summarize from that one. Similarly, the AI engineer video on why MCP and ChatGPT apps use double iframes came in with a transcript that is entirely a history of coffee. Kaldi the goat herder in 9th century Ethiopia, 17th century London coffeehouses, Dutch cultivation in Java. Nothing about MCP, ChatGPT, Iframes, Frédéric Barthelet, or Alpic. These appear to be transcript extraction errors rather than content errors on the creator's part. So if either video is relevant to your work, you'll want to watch the originals directly. And that's the second of the 2 unusable transcripts the AI engineer Iframe video mentioned just above. Nothing to add here beyond what I already noted. That's all 29 videos, a dense but genuinely eventful 25 hours. The Anthropic Fable situation is clearly the thread that runs through most of today, so if you only have time for 3 videos, Theo's deep dive, Indie Dev Dan's engineering analysis, and low levels policy concerns together give you the full picture. Have a great day.